So now getting back to our Firebase user listener, once we create this local user object, what we want to do is we want to save these locally. So let's say save user locally, and I will pass my user object that we have just created. And another thing we want to do is also to take this user and save it to our Firebase, so that in this area here in our database, we will have our first item saved, which will be our user object. So let's write another function that is going to save users in our Firestore. I'm going to put a mark here, call this save users. Let's create a func, call this save user to Firestore. And it's gonna take a user object and it will just do saving for us. So what we want to do is, again, when we are saving something to Firestore, we cannot just take any object that we have created and save it directly to Firestore. Instead, we can convert it to a JSON key value pairs, and then we can save this to our Firestore, which is accepted by Firebase. Again, we are going to use our JSON encoder and decoder in order to encode and decode something before we save to Firebase. But the good thing is there is no need to initialize this JSON encoder and decoder every time, and instead Firebase has its own has all this codable integrated inside, so we just can call a different function to save a data from encodable object, and it will go ahead and do all this encoding and decoding for us. But again, this function is throwing error, so we need to put this in a do catch block. So we are going to do, and I'm going to say let underscore, because we don't have to use this. Actually, we can just say like try straight away. Can try, and we access our Firebase reference, and this is the reference we have created. And then it asks us what reference to what collection you want. And like, remember, we are using enum here, so I can just say dot, and it gives me automatically the options we have in our enum. So it's either the user or recent in our case for now. I want to access the users because this is where we want to save our user. And then we want to create a document with a path. And the path to our document is going to be our user ID. And we want to create a user. So let's say set data from, and you can see that this one is setting a data from encodable, which our user object is codable, so it's encodable and decodable. And it says that this function is throwing an error. That's why we have it in do catch block. So our encodable here is our user object itself. So we pass that, and all our Firebase will do is take our user first, convert it to key value pairs, and then it's gonna save it to our Firebase. Then I'm going to print, in case if we have an error, let's say error dot localized description, comma, and let's pass some adding user, and we'll pass the user, pass the error, and then it will tell us what this is for. Just say adding user. This is for us easier to find it. So let's go ahead and call this function here. So I will say self.save user to Firestore, and we pass our user object instead. So let's look at our register user function again. When we call it, we pass an email and a password, and then we have this completion handler. When our user will be registered, this function will be called back and we are notified. Then to register, we are accessing the Firebase authentication. We create a user with email and password, and we pass whatever error we may receive or not to our callback. Then if there was no error, we are going to send the verification email to that user. And also we are going to create a custom user object, and then we are going to save it to locally and save it to Firestore. So let's call this register user function. If we go to our login view, here we should have a button for login button pressed. And remember, we have two options. It's either login or register. Both of them are called whenever this button is pressed. And we just check if we are in login or in registration mode. So I'm going to go at the bottom here, and let's, under our helpers, we are going to create two functions. The first one is going to be private func register user, and the second one is going to be login user. Right, so for now, this both of these functions are empty. And if I scroll up where my login button pressed is, so say we have data for, we have login or register. And here we are going to call the login or register function depending on the status of this is login. So I will say is login. And then if it's login, I want to call our login user, else I want to call my register user function. And that's it. There is nothing more in this function to do. It's just simply calling either of these two functions. So going back to our register user function, whenever we call this, remember we are also checking before we call it if the data was inputted. So in this case, we know that our email password and the repeat password are correctly called and filled. And what we want to do here, actually, we are checking if the password, email, and repeat password are correct. But there is one more check we need to do for our registration, is if the password and the repeat password, both of them match each other. So I will say if password text field dot text, unwrap this, equals to repeat password text field dot text, it means our passwords were correct. Else we can say progress AUT show error, and let's say the passwords don't match. And this will be our error. But however, if the two passwords are correct and they are same, we are going to access our Firebase user listener and ask it to register a user. So we will say Firebase user listener, we get the shared, and we say register user with email, and the email is going to be our email text field dot text, and the password will be our password text field dot text. Unwrap this, and completion, we have an error variable. So let's call this error. So what I want to do when we get our completion handler back, which is our error, we want to check if there is an error. Remember, it's an optional, so it may be error or just a nil if everything was successful. So we check if there is an error or no. So we say if error is equals to nil, it means there is no error, everything was successful. So I'm going to access my progress AUT, and I'm going to show success, and let's inform our user that we have sent him a verification email. All right, and put a dot here. And also what we want to do is say self.refresh, resend email button outlet is hidden equals to false. The reason we are doing this is we want to unhide our resend email button, because if our user didn't get the verification email, we want to activate this button so the user can click to get another verification email from us. So let's run this to see if this works. Before we are running, actually, let's put also an else statement in case if there was an error. I'm going to pass it, let's say progress AUD show failed, and let's pass our error localized description. And here also let's call it show failed. All right, let's just rerun again. Okay, so let's go to our sign up. You see there is no button here. I'm going to try to register. Let me put something not matching here. Again, also this one we need to set it as a password. So let's say register, it says password don't match, which is good. So we click on register now. It says verification email sent, and the send email, resend email button appears. So we can click this one as well. Before I go forward, let me just quickly fix this password thing. Go here. I'm interested in the stack view and repeat password, which is invisible. I'm going to enable the secure text entry there. Okay, and right now, if you check your email, you should receive a verification email. Let me check mine on my phone. And I have received the verification email. There is a link to click to take us to verification, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I want to go back to login screen. I want to now try to, okay, the login function doesn't work. So don't go ahead and don't verify your email, because we want to try our login function, and we want to make sure that unless our user's email is verified, we will not log him in. So right now, if you go to the Firebase authentication section, you will see that there is a new user created with an email address. The creation date and last sign-in dates are same, and the user ID is this. If you go to the database, you will see that there is a new user collection here, and then this user collection has a document with the ID of the authenticated user. It's M3H3, and then this user has some values here. Avatar link is nil, email address, the ID, push ID, status, and username. Everything is set. So we have successfully saved this user on Firestore, and hopefully we have saved it to our user defaults as well. Right now I don't have an option to check it, but we are going to trust that this is correct. So in our next lecture, we are going to write the function to log in the user, and if the user login is successful as well, then we can retrieve our currently saved local user object as well. And also we are going to check our verification email. So we're going to allow the user in only if the email is verified.